Alex sat with his back against the starship and watched his children play. The two of them ran through the long green grass, chasing each other onto the beach below, carefree as children should be. Beyond them was a vast crystal blue ocean, the tide gently flowing in and out against golden sand, and above the water, hundreds of floating islands covered in thick jungle vegetation slowly bobbed up and down, reflecting the movement of the ocean below. Brightly coloured birds flitted between them, filling the air with beautiful song. He knew this wouldn't last. It never did. Eventually the war would catch up with them, and they would be back in the ship, skimming through the cold, dark forge, trying to find another refuge, another place to hide. But for now, they had peace. For now, they had comfort. For now, his children could play, and he was reminded that this is what made it all worth it. Smiling to himself, he closed his eyes and took in a deep breath of the warm sea air, letting the sounds of birdsong and children's laughter wash over him, and whispered a prayer of thanks to the heavens. Hello, and welcome to The Bad Spot, an actual play podcast where I, Matt Risby, and I alone am playing through Ironsworn Starforged. This week's serene and beautiful tale from the Drift was from Chris Munford, who, with this submission, joins an elite group of two-time Tale from the Drift contributors. Chris is also responsible for writing my favourite community submission, and it's a close run thing because we've had so many good ones, but the short bit of fiction he wrote for episode 17 back in season 1 about Mina, the genetically enhanced individual who escapes from a testing facility, was really quite excellent. And Chris sent this week's piece in with the news that he is running Mina as a PC in his upcoming Starforged campaign. And I think that is incredibly cool, that something rolled up for a Tale from the Drift has found a life somewhere else. And I don't know if or how Chris plans to share his campaign, but if he does plan to share it, I will be first in line to find out how Mina gets on in her quest to fight back against those responsible for experimenting on her. If you want to roll some dice and write something for me to read at the beginning of a future episode, then the submission guidelines and contact details are on screen now. And whilst I have you, why don't you leave a like, subscribe, and click that little bell icon so you can follow along the campaign each and every week. One last bit of business before we get into this week's episode proper, and that is we have some more fan art. And once again, this has been sent in by the enormously talented Twitter user Running Critter 1, who has sent in this depiction of the Arc Dragon that has been terrorizing Archer. And I'll repeat once again, it is incredibly cool to see how people visualize the story I'm telling and the world I'm building, and I absolutely love what he's done here, and I want to thank him once again for taking the time to do this and send it in. And whilst I said feel free to interpret things however you like, I think Archer is standing far too casually, far too heroically in the face of great danger here. That's just plain unrealistic and asking for trouble. But anyway, fantastic work, and please feel free to leave effusive praise below in the comments. Last week, we saw the aftermath of the prison break on Sepulchre from Azriel Vega's viewpoint. We see him struggling to come to terms with his failure to snare Archer in his trap, and the uncertainty this brings in the chaos of what is happening around him. As the Soulbinder's docking craft touches down in the hangar, however, he appears somewhat pleased that they have arrived. Elsewhere, Archer comes to after his encounter with the Arc Dragon. He awakes to find himself somehow in one piece and still strapped into the cockpit of the Rockhopper. However, he has been dragged and flung some considerable distance by the great beast, and only the nose of the craft has survived. Stunned that he made it, Archer reorientates himself and realizes he has somehow, fortuitously, ended up much closer to the mountain pass towards which he was already travelling. He encounters more stone reptiles, this time seemingly serving as kind of a water feature, implying that whoever built these things had some degree of advanced engineering skills. Archer gets himself together, and although he is banged up, dispirited, and low on supplies, he carries on toward the mountain pass, making his way up the switchbacks towards the giant stone reptiles that guard the way. He struggles with both the altitude and his general physical condition, but after several hours he finally makes it. However, as he approaches the giant stone guardians, he is struck by a strange, sticky substance. As it touches his skin, it has a powerful, paralyzing effect, and he collapses to the ground, unable to move. As he lays there looking up at the stone guardians, he is more than a little surprised to see one of the stone statues blink. So it appears that Archer is in another fine mess, and as he lays motionless, and he stopped struggling against this kind of paralyzing agent a long time ago, all he can move is his eyes. And he looks up at these giant stone reptiles again, and yes, once again, the statue on the right blinks. Or at the very least, the eyelid that was seconds ago open now closes. The thing's body or head doesn't move, but Archer definitely saw one of its eyes open and close. And it's safe to say that the last few weeks of Archer's life have been a trip. Since he took what seemed like a fairly straightforward retrieval job from the conduit, he has been shot, blown up, attacked by radioactive kangaroos, punched, thrown through a window, blown up again, shot again, captured, beaten, imprisoned, found himself connected to an ancient network of iron gates, been blown up again, fought a horde of space zombies, fallen from the sky, and been electrocuted by a giant dinosaur. But this probably is towards the top of the most unusual things that have happened to him, I think, as he lays there splattered with a strange, mysterious, paralyzing red goo, looking at a stone lizard that appears to have just blinked at him. So what's happening here? What actually is happening here? Well, Archer sees more movement, and this time it's at the base of the statue. As a person emerges, cautiously, in a crouching posture, and Archer can't make them out clearly, but there's definitely a person there. And then there's another, and another, and they slowly approach, as Archer counts 5 figures, moving closer, moving cautiously, moving slowly. So who are these people? And what do they want? And how did they get here? Well, I kind of had an idea this week about who these people might be. And I didn't plan on this planet being inhabited. And when I say I didn't plan it, I mean the oracle rolls that we've come up with so far had leaned heavily towards it not being inhabited, and that's just how I'd started to kind of consider it. But that very last roll at the very end of the last episode, that peril that was for the weak hit as we finished the expedition, said that we found this place, this pass, these stone guardians, we found it guarded or patrolled. And it was the patrolled part of that role that made me think that there probably had to be people up here. And I know that you can interpret the prompts any way you want, but I just got to thinking that, like, if there were people up here in the mountains, kind of encountering them and interacting with them might actually help us find out a little more about this place. And I felt like ultimately that was the most interesting way to go with it. So who are these people? And like I said, I had some preliminary ideas, and I think So what I'm going to say is that these people, whoever they are, and we will roll up the details for them, whoever they are, these people are also survivors like Archer, in that they have somehow ended up here having come through the Iron Gate unintentionally. And since then, whenever that was, they have been stuck here. And I think that these are definitely not the same people that made these statues. I think that those are ancient and have been there for a long time, made by some lost civilization that's been kind of gone for eons. But these people that are approaching Archer, are more recent inhabitants. And however long they have been here, they have found some measure of safety from the Ark Dragon down in the valley. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the oracles to figure out who these people are and what their deal is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in a bunch of different oracles from lots of different sets to kind of work all of this out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how many people are in this group. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the settlement oracle, and depending on how many we roll up, it might tell us if we have like a settlement up here. So we don't know exactly where we are in the forge, but it's safe to say that this is way off the beaten track. So what we're going to say is this is in the Expanse, because depending if you're in the Terminus, the Outlands, or the Expanse, is a different set of results on the oracle. So we're going to say Expanse and ask, what is the population of this quote-unquote settlement? 20 is few. Okay, so really not very many at all. So this group that's now approaching Archer could well be everyone. But, I mean, what's a few? Should we say no more than 10 or 12? Say 12? Let's say 12. So there are 12 people. We have a small population of 12 people who have been also trapped here, having come through the Iron Gate unintentionally. How did they get trapped here? Well, it makes sense that if their ship or transport got sucked into or accidentally kind of passed through an Iron Gate somewhere else, and they emerged here on this planet, that they were obviously out doing something at that time. So we can probably learn about this group by establishing what their ship was out doing, and we're going to do that by rolling on the Starship Mission Oracle to find out what the starship was doing when they were out and got sucked through the gate. So let's roll that up. 36 is evacuate a location. Evacuate a location. Okay, that's interesting. Why would a group evacuate a location? Could be some kind of rescue from an environmental catastrophe, perhaps, or maybe a rescue from some kind of celestial event that's kind of threatening an entire planet, like a collapsing star or black hole or something. I'm kind of thinking, I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can try and tie this into our main story. So what if a planet or settlement needed to be evacuated because of war? And that war is between two of the founder clans. And what if these people here are keepers of the peace? They are a kind of peacekeeping troops like the UN, kind of dispatched by some authority somewhere in the Terminus, and maybe they got kind of sent to intervene in this ongoing conflict between two clans somewhere out in the Outlands or the Expanse somewhere. And yeah, they were sent out to observe or like facilitate the safe passage of an evacuation of refugees, basically, from some war-torn planet where these two clans are fighting over some resource or another. It doesn't really matter what it is. But yeah, there was this settlement caught in the middle, And maybe there was like a ceasefire negotiated or something, and these troops, I guess we could call them, stepped in to either oversee or actually carry out this humanitarian mission. And let's say that they completed that mission. And after they had evacuated successfully the refugees from wherever this was, they are like taking them away to safety or dropping them off or whatever, and they're kind of traveling somewhere else or returning back to the terminus. And whilst they're doing that, whilst they're like refueling or like stopping to recharge the e-drive or something, what if they receive like a distress signal? And being the kind of sorts who would want to help out those in need, they go and investigate. And when they go and investigate, they find nothing at the location of where the distress signal was coming from. They find nothing there, except maybe like some floating debris in space. Like clearly there's been, you know, a kind of a recent battle here or kind of a recent conflict. And the other thing that's there is this mysterious iron gate just kind of hanging in space. And they've never seen anything like this before. And they kind of move closer to investigate, and maybe there's a bigger ship that kind of dispatches a smaller ship to go and have a look. And as they do, they get close and they're pulled through it because it was active. And through that gate, they ended up here. So, if we've established who they are and how they got here, how long have they been stranded here? And what we're going to do is we're going to ask the Oracle, 50-50, yes or no. Have they been here longer than a year? 12, yes. Okay, have they been here longer than 5 years? 79, no. Well, I don't want to keep rolling to kind of narrow it down exactly. So let's say that these peacekeeping troops who were out on a humanitarian mission and got sucked through an iron gate and ended up on this planet have been stranded here for just over, let's say, 2 years. So having now rolled up all these details, we should now have an idea of how they might look to Archer and also how they might act and interact with him. So as they move closer to Archer, still slowly, cautiously, he can start to make out some more details. I think they're dressed in kind of heavy clothing to protect them against the cold. They've got these kind of thick jackets and goggles and scarves pulled up over their faces. But Archer notices that some of this environmental gear that they're wearing, it doesn't seem to be made for the purpose of being environmental gear. Like some of these people are wearing kind of heavy coats that have been modified and added to with bits of other items of clothing kind of stitched together, and animal furs kind of crudely strapped on to add an extra layer, extra protection against the elements. It's fair to say the group have a kind of a real kind of cobbled together aesthetic. One of the figures steps forward, standing over Archer, looking down. Let's roll up some pronouns. 56 is he, him. He crouches down beside Archer and pulls the scarf that's covering his face down. What does he look like? What's his first look? 99 is youthful. Okay. And 46 is haggard. Youthful and haggard. Thank you, Oracles. Great help. So, okay, he has this heavy reddish brown beard, and his pale skin is kind of blushed by the cold. And despite the years that the beard and what must be a very hard existence adds, This man is still actually quite young. Archer, probably best guess, places him somewhere in his mid-20s. And what's he like? What's his disposition? 41 is suspicious. Well, that makes sense, I guess. But we also have to bear in mind that through the other rolls that we made about these people, about who they are, through the other oracle results and all the details that we've established, that these are fundamentally probably good people. I think that's safe to say. So the man looks Archer over, turns to one of the others and says, "Did you have to shoot him twice?" And one of the voices answers, "I wanted to be sure." And the man says, "What did you think he was going to do?" And he's looking Archer over and seeing how he's dressed and equipped, quickly deciphers that he's woefully unprepared for the conditions up here. He looks at Archer and says, "I am sorry for the discomfort, friend. It will pass." He looks back down into the valley and says, "This is a dangerous place, friend, but you will be safe with us. However, I ask in advance that you forgive our caution." And he takes Archer's gun from its holster, and the others move in and kind of take his satchel and staff, and maybe some others kind of come and quickly frisk him, kind of pat him down. And the man says, "I am sorry for the incursion, but we have seen enough conflict and do not wish to invite more." And then he says to the others, "Get him up, get him inside." And I think that's when whatever Archer has been shot with, this kind of gloop, fully takes hold and he slips into unconsciousness, which is something he's been doing a lot of lately. But I think that I'd like to use this opportunity to just give Archer a breather. He's not had a good night's sleep in a while, it's fair to say. And whilst this is assisted by some weird red paralysing gloop, I think it might be just what he needs. So what I'm wondering here is, shall we use this opportunity to make the Sojourn move? Now, looking at the move, it says, when you spend time recovering within a community, roll plus heart. And I think we've established that there is a degree of safety here because of who these people are. Even though there is this kind of like caution and distrust, I think the Archer is safe. So I'm going to make the move. So we are going to Sojourn rolling plus heart. A much needed, and I'm going to say much deserved, strong hit. On a strong hit, this is a safe refuge. You and your allies may each choose 2 recover moves, heal, heart, and repair or resupply, instead of rolling, assuming an automatic strong hit for each. And each individual move can be taken more than once. Okay, so I personally think that given that these people are survivors and they're kind of just living this hard scrabble existence up in the mountains, it's not appropriate to make the resupply move. So what we are going to do is heal and hearten. And I won't go through the detail of it because there's a few steps to it, but because we are neither wounded nor shaken, we are going to end up getting +3 to both of those tracks. So our health and our spirit are back up to 5, back up to full health and full spirit. So we have had quite the upturn in our fortunes here, which for someone like Archer Barlow, who seems to pinball from disaster to disaster, it comes as a blessed relief. And I'm slightly worried that you will all stop tuning in if it starts to go too well for him, because I know there's a lot of sickos out there who like to stop by each week and enjoy his endless series of slapstick misfortunes. But give me this, please. He is right now, in this moment, right here, safe and well. So let's envision this. Archer remembers very little about getting to wherever he is now. The last thing he remembers is the sensation of being lifted and carried and passing under the watchful eye of a giant stone lizard. What follows is a long, long, restful sleep, the likes of which he has not had since, I guess, the last time he nearly died, which was down on the ocean world, where he was recovering on the research rig, with Keelan and Santos. It's a throwback to last season. That was some time ago. But this has been even more replenishing and revitalizing than that. Whether it was his general condition or the paralyzing agent with which he'd been shot, he reaches a state of unconsciousness and relaxation that he has not managed for years. And crucially, for the first time in recent memory, his sleep was undisturbed by the troubling visions that have plagued him since making that connection with the Iron Gates back on Paxton Hold. And those visions, those unusual flashes, those glimpses of the black glass spire in the desert, the mysterious people with their skin fused with black iron, the screams, all those horrifying images, all those horrifying sounds have been quietened as Archer finds some long-awaited respite. And he slowly awakes in unfamiliar surroundings. He's in a small, circular stone room with a low ceiling, and he is laid on a bed under many blankets and animal furs. It is cozy, it is warm, it is homely. He sits up, his head nearly scraping on the low ceiling. He checks himself over, the professor's black iron compass still on its chain around his neck. He slides his hand inside his undershirt and can feel and see the blue-black bruising that the rockhopper harness left over his shoulders and chest. He takes a look at his hand and sees that it's stained red. And whatever that goo was, it's left this dark mark, like a kind of birthmark where he touched it. He hasn't got a mirror, but he can only assume he has the same on his neck. He notices at the foot of the bed there is a ladder, and then as he looks closer, a drop down. He is on a mezzanine level above a room below, from which he can hear a low, metallic hum. He shuffles forward and looks down over the edge. And the room at the foot of the ladder is not much bigger than the mezzanine itself. There's a stone floor and a large metal drum, which has pipes running in and out of it, pipes that seem to disappear up and outwards and into the stone. The drum is the source of the metallic humming. There is a figure stood in front of the drum, waiting for a small metal kettle that sits on top of it to boil. As it begins to whistle, the figure turns around and looks up at Archer. It's the man who addressed him yesterday, this time without his heavy outdoor wear. He says, "Whenever you're ready, friend." And then he uses a rag to handle the kettle, pouring steaming water into 2 cups. The room slowly fills with this floral, citrusy fragrance that is enough to have Archer halfway down the ladder already. The man is sitting in a chair, sipping his tea. He motions for Archer to grab his cup and join him. Archer cradles the hot tea in his hands and brings it up to drink. It's a revitalizing brew, and no mistake. The man also gestures towards a tray that is on the vacant seat that has a bowl on it that is full of some kind of porridge or, space gruel. Archer is already sat down and eagerly hoovering it up. So famished is he. After a moment in which he allows Archer to enjoy his food, the man begins. "I can only apologize for the somewhat overzealous use of the neutralizer. And he reaches down and he brings up this weapon and he holds it in his hands, and it's like this kind of small pistol shaped weapon, but it has this kind of like really wide barrel and a big kind of drum magazine, making it look a lot like a little miniature grenade launcher. And the man continues. One hit is supposed to put a person down for 10 minutes. Archer finishes his mouthful and says, "How long was I out for?" The man says, 2 days. Had us worried, friend. And there's a, shall we say, slightly unusual vibe in the air. And Archer isn't quite sure if the man is kind of holding onto the weapon to like remind him that he's kind of armed and in charge, or that he doesn't fully trust him. He kind of suspects that's the case because ultimately this person has no reason whatsoever to trust Archer at all. The man glances over towards where Archer's jacket is hanging on a hook. The Griffin Institute emblem is clearly visible on the back. And the man says, "You're a long way from home." Archer says, "That is true." The man says, "I'm sorry. Allow me to introduce myself. So let's roll up a name. 23 is Cole. And last name, 96 Petrov. Cole Petrov is this guy's name. And he starts to tell Archer the whole tale, that they were on a much larger ship on a humanitarian mission. They answered a distress call and kind of followed it to what turned out to be empty space, all except for this glowing iron gate. And then they got dispatched on a shuttle to go and investigate, and Cole just happened to be the ranking officer on the shuttle, and that shuttle got pulled through the gate, and here they are. And Archer kind of sits and listens to all this and says, "So that was your shuttle down there, the Rockhopper?" And Cole nods before he says, "We came through and went into a tailspin. Couldn't pull out. Came down hard. We spent the night trying to get it in the air again. But well, you saw what's out there. Half the crew didn't survive the night. Those of us that did made it up here, and it's where we've been ever since." Archer says, "How long?" Cole takes his time and says, 2 years, give or take. Archer says, "Is there anyone else here?" Cole shakes his head and says, "No, but there was. Reasonably sophisticated civilization, by the looks of it." And he kind of gestures to the drum, which is pretty obviously like a boiler that's part of the central heating system that's keeping this place, wherever they are, warm. He continues, "Regrettably, they didn't master Eidolon travel by the looks of things, so all we've been able to do is wait. Wait for someone else to come through the way we did. Hope their ship isn't too banged up. Hope we can hitch a ride out of here." And he puts his cup down, and he puts the gun down too, maybe feeling more comfortable, perhaps, in Archer's company. And he leans forward, says, "You'll excuse me if we dispense of the small talk and jump right to the point. But where is your ship? And what condition is it in, friend?" And Archer puts his bowl down and says, "Well, I've got good news and bad news for you. The bad news is I didn't come through the gate in a ship." And Cole looks kind of rightly confused at this. And Archer says, "The good news is I can activate those gates. I activated another, much smaller gate and stepped through it. And that's how I ended up here." And Cole says, "You stepped through it?" Archer nods and says, stepped through, fell out. Cole says, you fell from up there. And Archer nods again, says, navigating them is still a work in progress, but if I can get up there, I can activate the gate, I can get us out of here. And Cole has this dubious look on his face, somewhat unsurprisingly, and says, again, you fell from up there and survived. And Archer says, evidently. And Cole looks deflated. Says, this isn't quite the news we were hoping for. And Archer says, I need to get out of here too. I have people out there depending on me. And Cole says, well, you may be waiting some time. And he stands up with this resigned sigh and moves over to the wall behind where they're sitting. And at that point in the wall, there seems to be a part of it that kind of shapes outwards in kind of like a convex fashion. And he reaches to the side and pulls down a lever. And to Archer's surprise, a small part of the wall opens like a shutter. He moves over and is instantly hit by a bracing gust of icy cold air from outside. And that's when he realizes that he is looking out of the eye of one of the stone dragons. That is how it blinked at him. This is a watchtower, and now he joins Cole looking out into the valley in the dead of night. Once again, the rain is pouring down, and from their vantage point high up in the mountains, the rain and mist form a thick blanket over the grasslands below. Cole says, please excuse me if I failed to hide my disappointment. This place has drained me of any hope I once had. And they look out across the valley, and there is suddenly this flash of light that illuminates this small spot on the blanket of rain, and a distant roar follows. And Archer says, that thing is still out there. Cole turns to Archer and says, that thing? And Archer looks kind of confused, and Cole kind of gestures back out through the eye. And after a second, another flash illuminates the darkness some way off. And then there's another out near the horizon, and another. Archer stops counting at 10 as the flashes spread out across the valley, these little blue-white dots that briefly illuminate the gloom. And Cole says ominously, when night falls, those things hold dominion over these lands. And Archer seems to not be listening, kind of steps away, deep in thought. After a moment, he kind of turns to Cole and says, what exactly did you salvage from your ship? And Cole says, why? And Archer says, I'm wondering if we could rig something, kind of launch it, get me up there, then I can activate the gate. And Cole is like, we can't. And Archer says, but if we could. And then Cole says, even if we could, we don't have any fuel, we don't have any power. And that's when Archer looks back out across the valley. And he watches as another arc dragon flashes. And he says, well, you don't have fuel, but you do have power. Luna steadies herself, putting her hands out to brace against the console as the Eclipse jerks forward abruptly. They had been out here hanging helplessly in space for hours as they watched each ship in the junk fleet, each scrambled snub fighter, pulled towards the Soulbinder's giant floating palace, caught in its tractor beams. They were powerless to resist the pull, each ship subsequently ensnared as they neared, with reams of chained hooks that shoot out from this bizarre craft's hull. The conduit had been pacing and continued to do so. Luna knows that she'd made a mistake, telling her about the encounter with the Risen, knowing what Archer said about her, about how she would double-cross anyone if it meant saving her own skin, that she was not to be trusted. And that's what Luna figured she was doing, formulating some way to extricate herself from the situation at her expense. Luna wished Archer were here. Without him, she felt less sure of herself somehow. She knew he curbed her most reckless impulses whilst she dragged him kicking and screaming out of his logical, methodical prison. She knew that neither of them would admit it, but their dynamic had a peculiar chemistry that just seemed to work. Together, they would get through this. They could get through anything. But looking across the Eclipse's cabin, she saw only the conduit, who she absolutely did not and could not trust to have her back. As they slowly moved towards the palace, they watch as multiple slender, shard-like craft, bright golden ships, slowly are dispatched, headed to the upper levels of the Sepulchre complex. It was a surreal sight. These must be boarding parties, sent to quell the chaos of the uprising on the prison levels. Luna watched them move in the opposite direction, because like all the other ships, the Eclipse was slowly being dragged towards the palace. Until it came to a sudden, violent halt, sending both Luna and the conduit stumbling to the floor. And then the Eclipse is forcibly turned by a different tractor beam, a different invisible tether, and starts to be slowly pulled in a new direction, towards the second hangar on Sepulchre. Luna looks to her left and right. They now have two golden escorts, Soulbinder ships guiding them in towards the Clanthorn stronghold, a stronghold where level by level the power is coming back on, coming back to life. The conduit hangs her head in despair. She turns to Luna and says, "I'm sorry, kid." And then Luna sees it. Through the tears welling in the conduit's eyes, that faint, pinkish yellow glow in each pupil. And the conduit's voice begins to slow. She says, "We're in real trouble now." Thank you a million times thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you have not done so already, and click that little bell icon so you can be notified as soon as the next video drops. I'll be back next week, but until then, it's farewell and safe passage.